My father spent 40 years teaching me that love shows up quietly. My husband taught me the opposite in about 4 seconds. That's how long it took him to plant his hand on our doorframe and keep an 80-year-old man out of a snowstorm. I want to tell you about the track meet first, because you need to know what my father actually was before I tell you what my husband did. I was 17. The meet was 40 minutes away in Millbrook, and the roads had iced over so badly the school canceled the parent bus. My father drove anyway, alone, because he'd told me he'd be there. He walked up to the fence 20 minutes late, snow on his shoulders, just in time to watch me finish 6th out of 6. He never mentioned the ice. I only found out years later from a neighbor how close he'd come to sliding off the shoulder near the reservoir. That was 30 years ago. On the night I'm telling you about now, his furnace died in a storm they were calling the worst in a decade, and he called me asking for one thing: a warm floor to sleep on until morning. My husband said no. Before I tell you what happened that night, I want you to ask yourself something. If your father needed one night indoors, in 14-degree weather, what would it take to stop you from opening the door? Because it took my husband 4 seconds. It took me a lot longer to understand what that meant. My father arrived at 9:12, with snow caught in his gray hair and a brown envelope pressed beneath his arm. His old sedan sat crooked at the curb, engine still running, headlights blurred by the storm. He held a small overnight bag in his left hand. His right hand trembled against the porch rail. I opened the door wider. "Dad, get inside." Before he could take a step, my husband moved in front of me. Mark planted one hand against the doorframe and blocked the entrance with his body. "This isn't a nursing home," he said. He did not shout. No anger, no raised voice. That would have been easier to fight. Instead, he spoke in the same flat tone he used when turning down a sales call or sending food back at a restaurant. My father looked at him. Then, he looked at me. The wind pushed snow through the open doorway, scattering it across the hardwood floor. "Move, Mark," I said. My voice sounded firmer than I felt. His eyes remained fixed on my father. "There's a Best Western 4 miles from here," he said. "I'm sure they have rooms." I stared at him. "He's 80 years old. His furnace died, it's 11 degrees outside." "He drove here," Mark replied. "He can drive there." My father shifted his weight and winced. A quiet breath escaped him. He had undergone a left hip replacement 2 years earlier. Cold weather made the joint stiff, and the short walk from the car had already left him breathing harder than usual. "Claire," Mark said quietly, "don't turn this into a scene." My stomach tightened. That sentence had ended arguments for years. It meant, "Don't embarrass me," and "Don't make me punish you later." My hand tightened around the doorknob. "Dad can stay in the guest room," I said. "Just for one night." I swallowed. "I'll change the sheets. You won't have to do anything." Mark leaned closer without removing his hand from the doorframe. "If you let him in," he whispered, "don't expect me to forget how you chose to handle this." My breath caught. He had spoken low enough that only I was supposed to hear, but my father heard him anyway. His face held no anger, no shock, only the tired recognition of a man who had watched me excuse Mark's behavior for years. I looked past my husband toward the staircase. Our 15-year-old daughter, Sophie, stood near the top in flannel pajamas, one hand wrapped tightly around the railing. Her face was pale. Her eyes were already wet. I wish I could tell you that seeing her gave me courage. I wish I could say I pushed Mark aside, grabbed my father's hand, and pulled him into the warmth, but I didn't. I turned back to my father. I can book the hotel for you," I said. My voice cracked. "I'll pay for it. Just let me call and make sure they have a room." The shame reached me before I finished the sentence. My father stared at me for a long moment. Snow melted along the shoulders of his coat. A drop of water slid down his cheek. For one terrible second, I could not tell whether it was melted snow or a tear. "I didn't come here to beg for a bed," he said. His voice was calm, but before he continued, he stopped to pull in a slow, painful breath. "I came to see if my daughter would open her door." My throat closed. He looked at Mark. Then his eyes returned to mine. You don't have to keep explaining him to me, sweetheart. His voice softened on that final word. Sweetheart. The same word he had used when I was 6 years old, when I scraped my knee and ran crying into his arms. I pressed my lips together, trying not to cry. Dad? But he had already lowered his eyes. He picked up his bag, tucked the brown envelope closer to his chest, and turned away. Dad, wait. My voice barely carried through the wind. He kept walking, slowly, one painful step at a time. Across the street, our neighbor, Ruth Alvarez, stepped onto her porch. Henry, she called. Henry, wait. But he was already inside his car before she reached the road. For a moment, the sedan did not move. It simply sat there beneath the falling snow, its red taillights glowing through the storm. I wondered if he was waiting for me to come after him. I almost opened the door. Almost. Then the car pulled away. The taillights grew smaller, fainter, until they disappeared completely into the snow. Mark closed the door. The sudden silence made me flinch. Then he turned the lock. Click. That was unnecessary, he said. I stared at the wet tracks my father's boots had left across the floor. My vision blurred. I blinked quickly, but one tear slipped free. Then another. Behind us, Sophie came down 3 steps. Grandpa was shaking, she whispered. Her voice broke on the final word. Mark did not even look at her. He'll be fine. Sophie stared at him. There was a coldness in her eyes I had never seen before. Then she looked at me. Not with anger. That would have hurt less. She looked at me with disappointment. Mom, she whispered. I opened my mouth. No words came. Only a weak, trembling breath. Sophie wiped her cheek with the sleeve of her pajamas. Then she turned and walked back upstairs. A few moments later, her bedroom door clicked shut. I stood beneath the staircase listening. At first, I thought she was crying. I did not know that she was calling her grandfather. My father had called me at 7:04 that evening. The storm had knocked out power across parts of the county, and the temperature inside his house had fallen to 52 degrees. He had tried the breaker, checked the thermostat, and called 3 repair companies before one finally agreed to come the following morning. I hate to ask, he said, pausing to clear his throat. Could I stay with you tonight? Arthur Bennett never asked for help unless every other choice had failed. After my mother died when I was 9, he raised me on a school bus driver's salary and a second job stocking shelves at night. He packed my lunches. He learned how to braid my hair, badly. And he stood beside the fence during every track meet, no matter the weather. Once he drove 40 minutes over icy roads just to watch me finish 6th. Snow covered his work jacket, and I cried as though I had won the race. Because he was there. When Mark and I missed our first mortgage payment, Dad brought us $4,000, nearly all the money he had saved. I tried to refuse it. He pushed the envelope back into my hands and gave me that gentle, crooked smile of his. You don't itemize your family, he said. Years later, during my pregnancy, he drove 40 minutes after work to cook for me while I was on bed rest. He arrived exhausted, loosened his tie, and stood over our stove as though there was nowhere else he would rather be. That was the man who had stood outside my door, asking for one night, and I sent him back into the cold. I barely slept. Mark did. At 11:30, I picked up my phone and typed, "Did you get a room?" I stared at the words until my eyes began to burn. Then I deleted them. I told myself that, in the morning, I would call him. I would apologize. I would repair what I had failed to repair at the door. Down the hallway, Sophie was still awake. I learned later that she reached her grandfather at 9:38. He was driving toward the Best Western when he answered. "I'm all right," he told her. "You didn't look all right. Cold makes old men look older." Sophie sniffed. "That doesn't even make sense." Dad laughed once, a small, tired sound. Then she heard him cough. "Grandpa? I'm here." Dad and Sophie ate breakfast together most Saturdays. He taught her how to change a tire, how to read a map, and how to notice the things people tried to hide. That final lesson had mattered months before the storm. A bank statement meant for Mark arrived inside an unmarked envelope. Sophie opened it because her name appeared beside one of the account numbers. Inside, she found 3 withdrawals from her college fund and a transfer to a private lender she had never heard of. She took the statement to Mark. "What is this?" He pulled the paper from her hand and glanced over it. For 1 second, his expression changed. Then the calm mask returned. "It's an accounting issue," he said. "Your mother and I have it handled." He shredded the statement that night. But Sophie had photographed it first, and she sent the picture to my father. Dad did not confront Mark. He checked with the bank. Then he searched the county records. Finally, he contacted a lawyer. What he discovered was worse than any of us could have imagined. A failed investment. $40,000 owed to a private lender. Most of Sophie's college savings, gone. And a loan against my father's home, bearing a forged signature. Dad copied every document and placed the evidence inside a brown envelope. That was what he had carried to our door. Mark had seen the lender's logo through a small tear near the corner. He knew why my father had come. At 10:17, while he was still speaking with Sophie, Dad's car slid near a flooded underpass less than 2 miles from our home. The engine stalled as he tried to reverse out of the rising water. "What happened?" Sophie asked. "The car is being stubborn." "Grandpa, it's nothing. I'm calling for help." He contacted roadside assistance, but crashes across the county had delayed the tow trucks. A few minutes later, Sophie noticed a change in his breathing. Each breath came shorter than the one before it. "Do you have your medicine?" There was a pause. Too long. "I have my regular pills. What about the spray Dr. Keller gave you?" Another pause. "I may have left the backup bottle at your house." My father kept emergency nitroglycerin in our hall cabinet. His cardiologist had told him to store a second bottle anywhere he stayed often. "I'll bring it," Sophie said. "No." His voice sharpened for the first time. "Wake your mother." Sophie turned toward our bedroom. The door was closed. She had watched Mark block an 80-year-old man from entering our home. She had watched me stand behind him and step back. "She'll tell him," Sophie whispered. "Then call an ambulance. You'll say you're fine and refuse to go." "I am fine. You're lying." Her voice cracked. Then Dad gave away his location through an old driver's habit. Mile marker. Underpass. Service road. His phone suddenly cut off. "Grandpa?" Silence. She called him back. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. At 10:46, Sophie put on her coat. Her hands were shaking so badly that she struggled with the zipper. She took the medicine from the hall cabinet, grabbed a flashlight, and slipped out through the back door. Before leaving, she sent me a text. "Grandpa needs his medicine. I'm going to him. Please don't let Dad stop you from coming." My phone was charging downstairs, on silent. I did not see her message until morning. I woke up at 6:37 because the house was too quiet. The storm had weakened, but the wind still scraped branches against the siding. I reached for my phone and saw Sophie's text. For a few seconds, the words would not settle into meaning. "Grandpa needs his medicine. I'm going to him. Please don't let Dad stop you from coming." I read it once, then again, and then I ran. Sophie? Her bed was empty. The blankets had been thrown aside. Her winter coat was gone. Downstairs, the back door stood unlocked, and a thin line of blown snow stretched across the kitchen floor. "Sophie!" I shouted her name until my throat hurt. "Sophie!" Mark came downstairs, fastening the belt of his robe. "What happened?" I pushed the phone toward him with a shaking hand. "Read it." He took the phone and stared at the message. His face changed, but not in the way mine had. My fear had come all at once, wild and immediate. His arrived a second late, as though he first had to decide what it should look like. We need to call the police, I said. She probably went to Ruth's. She said she went to my father. She's 15, Claire. She doesn't know where he is. My breath caught. She knew enough to leave. I dialed 911. The dispatcher asked practical questions. What was Sophie wearing? Did she have a phone? Did she leave on foot? Was there anywhere else she might have gone? I tried to answer, but the words kept breaking apart in my mouth. Behind me, Mark paced across the kitchen. We shouldn't overreact, he said. She's probably close by. I turned away from him and pressed the phone harder against my ear. At 7:14, an officer called. Mrs. Bennett? Yes. We found your father's car near the old Mill Creek underpass. My knees weakened. I grabbed the edge of the counter. Is he there? A brief pause followed. No, ma'am. The car is empty. I stopped breathing. Then the officer continued. We found a bicycle nearby. Sophie's bicycle. By the time we reached the underpass, my hands were numb. Dad's sedan sat at an angle near the flooded road, its driver's door hanging open. Sophie's dead phone lay beneath the front seat. Her bicycle rested near the guardrail. 2 sets of footprints led away from the road, toward an abandoned service station, before the wind erased them. A young deputy named Ortiz approached me with a notebook. Mrs. Bennett, when did you last see your father? I opened my mouth. For 1 weak moment, I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him my father had left willingly, that there had been some misunderstanding, some harmless disagreement that sounded better when spoken aloud. But Sophie was missing. My father was missing, and I had already protected Mark once, so I told Deputy Ortiz the truth. My husband stood in the doorway and refused to let him inside. Ortiz's pen stopped. During the storm? Yes. How old is your father? 80. My voice cracked. He only needed somewhere to stay for the night. Ortiz looked toward Mark, then returned his attention to me. He wrote everything down. Was your father carrying anything? A small bag, I said, and an envelope. Beside me, Mark turned his head. What kind of envelope? Ortiz asked. Brown, thick, sealed. An officer searching near the car bent down and lifted a torn piece of paper from the snow with his gloved fingers. Mark stepped forward too quickly. Is that from it? Ortiz looked at him. Could be. Can I see it? No, sir. Mark's jaw tightened. I stared at him. Our 15-year-old daughter was missing in freezing weather. My 80-year-old father had vanished beside a flooded underpass. Yet the first thing that pulled real urgency from my husband was a scrap of wet paper. Search teams moved toward the abandoned service station. Volunteers arrived carrying flashlights, blankets, and thermoses of hot coffee. Ruth came wearing the same boots she had worn the night before. The moment she saw me, she hurried forward and wrapped her arms around me. I held on for 1 second, then my knees nearly gave out. I tried to reach him, Ruth said softly. I called his name, but he drove away too fast. A sob rose in my throat. I should have stopped him. Ruth pulled back and looked directly into my eyes. You should have let him in. The words struck harder because she did not raise her voice. She did not soften them, and I did not ask her to. Around 10 o'clock, a search dog caught a scent near the service road. Teams spread through the trees behind the old station, calling Sophie's name and my father's. Sophie! Arthur! Their voices echoed through the woods. Mark stayed near the car. I watched him scan the snow around the open driver's door, the ditch, the guardrail, the torn remains of the envelope. He barely looked toward the trees. Why are you standing here? I asked. I don't want to get in their way. Your daughter is out there. So is everyone else. I stared at him. For the first time, I did not recognize the man standing in front of me. Or perhaps, I was finally recognizing him. At noon, Mark walked behind the command vehicle and pulled out his phone. I followed him without deciding to. His back was turned. I need to know whether copies are enough, he said quietly. If the originals are wet or damaged, can they still use them? I stopped walking. There was a pause on the other end of the call. No, Mark said. I don't know who else has seen them. I stepped around the vehicle. Who are you talking to? Mark spun around and immediately lowered the phone. My attorney. Why? His eyes shifted toward the officers. Because your father clearly had something he planned to use against me. Against you? He has never liked me. A bitter, breathless sound escaped me. Not quite a laugh, and too broken to be one. My daughter is missing, I said, and you're asking a lawyer about wet paper. Claire, this isn't the time. I stepped closer. No. My voice trembled, but I did not lower it. It's the first time. His expression hardened. I did not know what the envelope contained. I did not know what my father had discovered. I only knew one thing. My husband was terrified of it. At 1:26, a voice crackled through one of the radios. Every officer nearby went still. They found the maintenance shed. My heart slammed against my ribs. Deputy Ortiz reached for his radio. Is anyone inside? Static answered first. Then a voice said, Someone's in there. I ran until an officer caught my arm. Ma'am, wait. The shed stood behind the abandoned service station, half hidden by bare trees and rising snowdrifts. Its door hung crooked on one hinge. Paramedics pushed through the narrow opening with blankets, oxygen, and emergency bags. I tried to see past them. I could not. Is she in there? I cried. Is my daughter in there? No one answered. Then, from inside the shed, a paramedic shouted, We have a pulse. My knees nearly gave out. A moment later, they carried Sophie through the doorway on a stretcher. Her lips were blue. Ice clung to her hair and eyelashes. She was wrapped inside a man's heavy winter coat. My father's coat. Sophie. I reached for her, but one of the paramedics blocked me, while another fitted an oxygen mask over her face. She's alive, he said, but we need to move now. I looked back toward the shed. Where's my father? The paramedic's eyes shifted toward the trees. Where is he? I asked again. No one answered. I climbed into the ambulance and held Sophie's bare hand between both of mine. Her fingers felt stiff, cold. Wrong. Sophie, I whispered. Mommy's here. Her eyes did not open. As the ambulance doors began to close, I looked outside. Mark stood behind the police line. For 1 second, our eyes met. He did not run toward us. He did not call Sophie's name. He did not move at all. Then the doors shut between us. At the hospital, doctors treated Sophie for severe hypothermia and frostbite in 2 toes. They covered her with heated blankets, started warm fluids, and placed monitors across her chest. I sat beside her bed while the police continued searching for my father. Every few minutes, I asked for an update. Every time, the answer was the same. Nothing yet. At 3:02, Deputy Ortiz entered the room. He removed his hat before walking toward me. And I knew. I knew before he spoke. No, I whispered. My body began shaking. Mrs. Bennett. No. He stopped beside the bed. They found your father about 40 yards from the shed, near the edge of the service road. I pressed one hand against my mouth. He had been moving toward the sound of a snowplow when he collapsed. Was he alive? Ortiz lowered his eyes. His body temperature had fallen too far. His heart couldn't recover. A sound came out of me. Small. Broken. I did not recognize it as my own. I gripped the rail of Sophie's bed to keep myself upright. Did he suffer? Ortiz did not lie. He fought hard to keep moving. That was all he said. He did not tell me it had been peaceful. He did not tell me my father had simply closed his eyes and gone to sleep. He gave me the truth. My father had fought. Alone. In the cold. I bent over Sophie's bed and pressed my forehead against her hand. My shoulders shook as the tears came. My father had asked for warmth. One night, one bed, one open door. I had stood 6 feet away from him inside a heated house, and let another person decide he could not have it. Mark arrived an hour later carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on the table beside me. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology sounded borrowed, like something he had practiced in the elevator. I stared at him. "Did you know what was inside that envelope?" His eyes shifted for half a second. "No. You called a lawyer before they found Sophie. I was protecting myself." "From what?" "Your father had been asking questions about our finances." I slowly stood. "This is not the place to discuss it," Mark added. A bitter breath escaped me. "You say that whenever the truth reaches the room." "Claire." "No." My voice cracked. "Don't tell me to calm down. Don't tell me not to make a scene. And don't tell me this isn't the place." He looked toward the hospital door. People were passing in the hallway. He hated witnesses. "I came here to support you," he said. "You came here because you wanted to know what the police found." His face hardened. He left soon afterward, saying he needed to call his office. That evening, Deputy Ortiz returned carrying a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside were several folded documents. They were damp, stained, and wrinkled, but still readable. "Your father moved these from the envelope into the zipped lining of his coat," Ortiz said. "The outer envelope came apart near the car." He glanced toward Sophie. "We found the coat on your daughter." My hands began trembling as he passed me the bag. The first page showed a loan secured against my father's house. Borrower, Arthur Bennett. The signature looked like his. At first. Then I noticed how smoothly it had been written. My father's arthritis forced him to pause between letters. His signature always had small breaks where his fingers stiffened. This one did not. Below it was Mark's name. Broker contact, Mark Bennett. My breath stopped. I turned to the next page. Then the next. The documents traced withdrawals from Sophie's education account into a private investment company connected to Mark's friend, David Reyes. $42,000. Most of what my father and I had saved for her future. Gone. I kept reading until the words blurred behind my tears. "How long have the police known about this?" "Your father met with an attorney 3 days ago," Ortiz said. "The attorney contacted us this afternoon after hearing what happened." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. "Why didn't Dad go straight to the police?" Ortiz hesitated. "He told the attorney he wanted to speak with you first." I closed my eyes. Even while carrying proof against Mark, even after discovering that his home had been used as collateral, my father had come to me first. He had still believed I deserved to hear the truth in private. And I had left him standing outside. Sophie woke up 2 days later. Her eyes opened slowly, confused at first, then frightened. She looked at me, and immediately began searching the room. "Grandpa," she whispered. My throat closed. I tried to answer, but I waited 1 second too long. Sophie knew. Her face folded around a small, broken sound. "No." I climbed carefully into the bed beside her and wrapped my arms around her. She began to shake. Not from the cold this time. From grief. "He gave me his coat," she sobbed against my shoulder. "I told him not to." "You were freezing." "He was freezing too." "I know. He kept saying he wasn't cold." Her voice broke. "He lied so I would stop crying." I held her tighter while tears soaked the shoulder of my shirt. Then Sophie pulled back. Her eyes were swollen and red. She gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Mom, what is it?" "He left a recording. Police recovered Dad's flip phone from the maintenance shed. The battery was dead, but the recording had survived." Sophie and I sat together in her hospital room while Deputy Ortiz placed the phone on the table between us. Then my father's voice filled the room. "Claire, I hope you never hear this." There was a pause, a slow, strained breath. "If you do, it means the night went worse than I expected." I pressed my fist against my mouth. Beside me, Sophie reached for my hand. Dad continued, "Don't spend your life blaming yourself for one closed door." His breathing grew heavier. Make sure it stays one night. Make sure you don't keep living in the house that taught you to close it. A sob caught in my throat. I lowered my head, but there was nowhere to hide from his voice. He explained the loan against his house. Sophie's missing college money. Mark's failed investment. He said he had left copies with his attorney, and that the documents hidden inside his coat would support everything. Then his voice softened. You were never weak, Claire. I closed my eyes. You got used to surviving quietly. There's a difference. He stopped to catch his breath. But quiet has a price. Another pause. And I think you've paid enough. He did not accuse me. He did not mention Mark's insult. He never said he was angry. That mercy hurt more than anger ever could. Near the end of the recording, his attention shifted away from the phone. Sophie, keep moving your feet. A faint voice answered in the background. I am. No, you're pretending. Despite the tears running down her face, Sophie let out a small, broken laugh. Then Dad said, and stop telling me you're not cold. You inherited many things from your mother, but convincing lies were not among them. The recording ended. For several minutes, neither Sophie nor I spoke. The hospital monitor continued its steady rhythm beside us. Beep, beep, beep. Finally, Sophie wiped her face and told me what had happened inside the shed. She had found Dad sitting against the wall, with one trouser leg torn at the knee. He had slipped while crossing the field and could barely put any weight on his left side. She gave him the medicine. Then she wrapped her scarf around his chest and tried to call 911. Her phone battery died before the call connected. Dad's phone showed 1 bar of signal, but every call dropped before they could speak to anyone. They waited for roadside assistance while the temperature continued to fall. To keep her awake, Dad made her walk from one side of the shed to the other. Back and forth, back and forth. When she began shaking too hard to speak, he removed his coat. No, Sophie told him, you need it. So do you. You're colder than I am. I've had 80 winters, he said. You've had 15. I know what I'm doing. She tried to push the coat back toward him. He refused. Then he wrapped it around her shoulders, zipped it to her chin, and tucked the collar against her neck. He smiled when he did it, Sophie whispered. Her mouth trembled. Like we were sitting in his kitchen, and he was only fixing my scarf. Near dawn, they heard an engine moving along the service road. Dad believed it was a snowplow, or perhaps the tow truck. He placed one hand against the wall and forced himself to stand. Sophie, stay inside. She grabbed his sleeve. You can't walk. I only need to get close enough for them to see me. Grandpa, please. I'll come back. He gently removed her hand from his arm. Then he left before she could stop him. The engine passed without seeing the shed, but Dad kept moving toward the road, one painful step at a time. He made it 40 yards. Sophie waited for him to return, until she lost consciousness. The church overflowed at Dad's funeral. Former students stood shoulder to shoulder along the back wall. Men from the hardware store carried his casket. People I had never met told me stories about him. How he had waited with a frightened child after a school bus broke down. How he had quietly bought groceries for a family whose father had lost his job. How he had once driven through a storm to deliver medicine to an elderly neighbor. Each story revealed another door my father had opened for someone. And all I could remember was the one I had closed on him. Mark sat beside me during the service. He lowered his head at the appropriate moments. He wiped his eyes when other people cried, but the only time his composure truly broke was outside the church, when a reporter approached him. Mr. Bennett Hale, are police investigating your financial dealings with Arthur Bennett? Mark's face drained of color. Who told you that? The reporter lifted her microphone. Are you suspected of taking money from your daughter's education account? Mark pushed past her. That was when something inside me finally settled. For years, I had searched his face for proof that he loved us more than he loved control. I had searched for regret after every threat, tenderness after every cruel remark, some hidden goodness that would explain why I stayed. I stopped searching. 3 days after the funeral, police seized Mark's devices and financial records. A forensic accountant traced 18 months of withdrawals from Sophie's account. Mark had guaranteed a brewery loan for his friend, David Reyes. When the business failed and the private lender threatened to sue, Mark used my father's house as collateral. He forged Dad's signature. He drained Sophie's college fund. And he convinced himself he could replace the money before anyone noticed. 17 days after the funeral, 2 detectives came to our front door. Mark answered wearing his work shirt, already dressed for a client meeting. One detective held up his badge. "Mark Bennett Hale?" Mark looked over his shoulder at me. "Yes? We have a warrant for your arrest." His face went still. "What for?" The detective read the charges. Forgery, identity theft, financial fraud, and theft from a custodial education account. Mark turned toward me. "You did this." His voice carried the same warning it had carried for years, but it no longer frightened me. I stood in the hallway with Sophie beside me. "No," I said. My voice did not shake. "You did." The detectives pulled his hands behind his back. "I just stopped protecting you from it." They placed him in handcuffs and led him through the same doorway he had blocked that night. For one moment, Mark looked back at me. Perhaps he expected me to defend him. Perhaps some part of him still believed I would apologize for making a scene. I said nothing. I watched until the detectives placed him inside the police car, until the door slammed shut, until the car turned the corner and disappeared. Then I stepped back inside and closed the door. Mark made bail 4 days later. His sister picked him up from the county courthouse, but he came to the house that evening because I had asked him to collect a suitcase. I had placed it beside the dining room table. My wedding ring rested on top of the divorce papers. He entered through the side door without knocking, as though the house still belonged to him in every way that mattered. For 19 years, our worst conversations had happened at that table. That night, I sat down before he could tell me where to sit. Mark walked into the dining room and stopped. His eyes moved from the suitcase, to the ring, and finally, to the papers beneath it. "You're filing now?" "Yes." He let out a slow breath. "Your father has been dead for less than a month. My father's death is not what ended this marriage. You're grieving, Claire. You're not thinking clearly." I looked directly at him. I have never thought more clearly. Mark pulled out the chair across from me, but he did not sit. I was drowning. His voice softened, as if that sentence should have changed everything. "So you used our daughter's money." "I planned to replace it." "With what?" "The brewery was supposed to recover. It closed 8 months ago. I was trying to buy time." A bitter breath escaped me. "You stole my father's house to buy it." His face tightened. "I didn't steal the house. You forged his name on a loan against it." "I made a bad decision." "No." I shook my head. "You made the same decision every month for a year and a half." Mark finally sat down. He placed his elbows on the table and rubbed both hands over his face. "I knew what would happen if I told you." "What?" "You would panic. You would run to your father, and he would look at me like I was dirt. He looked at you like a man who saw you clearly." Mark's eyes hardened. Then he glanced toward the staircase. "Where's Sophie?" "With Ruth." "So now you're discussing our marriage with the neighbor." I let the question die unanswered. The silence made him shift in his chair. "I never told Sophie to leave that night," he said. "No." I folded my hands on the table. "You only taught her that the adults in this house would not help her grandfather. That was her choice. She is 15. She could have woken us. She believed you would stop her." His eyes moved away. I waited until he looked back at me. "And she believed I would let you." For the first time, Mark had nothing ready to say. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of the table. "I didn't know your father would drive into flooded water. You knew he was sick." I leaned forward. "You knew the roads were dangerous. You knew what he was carrying." "I didn't think he would die." My throat tightened, but I forced the words out steadily. "That is the problem, Mark." He stared at me. You never think beyond the moment your own comfort is threatened. For 1 second, I saw the charming, certain man I had married when I was 27. Back then, I had mistaken certainty for safety. "I loved you," he said quietly. The words might once have broken me. That night, they did not. "I believe you loved having me beside you. That's not fair." No. I gave a small, humorless laugh. You decided which of my friends were bad for me. You decided when I could visit my father without making you feel neglected. He opened his mouth, but I continued. You controlled the accounts, the car, the plans, even the volume of every disagreement. I was trying to take care of us. You controlled us, I said, and you called it care. His jaw tightened. I provided for this family. You took from everyone in it. The words settled between us. Mark looked down at the divorce papers. This won't bring him back. My breath caught. No. Then what does it solve? I thought of Sophie standing at the top of the stairs in her flannel pajamas. I thought of the disappointment in her eyes. It ends the part where Sophie watches me choose your peace over everyone else's safety. Mark's mouth opened, but no answer came. I slid the papers across the table. This is not revenge. My voice remained calm. It is a decision. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he reached down, picked up the suitcase, and walked toward the side door. His hand rested on the doorknob. He turned back. You're destroying our family over a man who is already dead. I slowly stood. He died trying to save the family you had already emptied out. Mark's face went still. Then he opened the door and left. I listened as his car started in the driveway. This time, I did not watch him drive away. A mutual friend told me later that Mark spent 11 nights at the Best Western, 4 miles from our house. The same hotel he had recommended to my father. I sometimes wondered whether he stood at the front desk with that room key in his hand and recognized it for what it was. An answer returning to him. I never asked. After Mark left, no one questioned the grocery bill. No one sighed when my sister called. No one waited for me to explain where I had been, but grief filled every space his control had vacated. Sophie woke from nightmares, shouting for her grandfather. She blamed herself for letting him leave the shed. I blamed myself for everything that had happened before it. A therapist told us that guilt turns tragedy into a math problem. We changed every choice in our minds. What if I had opened the door? What if Sophie had woken me? What if Dad had kept his coat? We worked through every possible answer, but each one ended with the same loss. One night, I found Sophie sitting on the kitchen floor, her back pressed against the cabinets. Her knees were pulled tightly against her chest. I should have made him keep the coat, she said. You were losing consciousness. He knew he would die without it. Her voice cracked. I sat down a few feet away. He knew you might. Sophie wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Then she looked at me. Why did you let Dad stop him from coming inside? The question had been waiting between us since the storm. I lowered myself onto the floor beside her. Because I was afraid of your father. Her head snapped toward me. What? Not afraid that he would hit me, I said quickly. He never did. I took a slow breath. I was afraid of what would happen afterward. Sophie said nothing. The silence. I continued. The punishment. The way money would suddenly become a problem. The way every room felt when he wanted me to know I had disappointed him. Her eyes filled again. So you picked him. The words were quiet. That made them hurt more. Yes. The answer scraped against my throat. I picked him because I had practiced picking him for 19 years. Sophie began to cry. But she did not look away from me. Neither did I. I'm sorry, I said. My voice broke and I paused until I could continue. Not the kind of sorry that asks you to make me feel better. She wiped another tear from her cheek. I failed, Grandpa. I failed you. And I am going to spend a long time proving that I understand what I did. Sophie did not hug me. She did not tell me everything was all right. She did not forgive me that night. I was grateful she did not pretend. Trust returned in small pieces. A week later, Sophie asked me to drive her to the cemetery. She carried no flowers, only the thermos she had taken into the storm. The lid was dented, and a strip of tape still clung to the handle. She placed it beside Dad's headstone and stood with both hands buried in the pockets of her coat. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Sophie said, "I was angry with him for leaving the shed." "So was I." She looked at me. "That sounds terrible." "It sounds honest." Her eyes returned to the headstone. "I'm angry with you too." "I know." "Are you going to tell me I need to forgive you?" "No." The answer surprised her. She turned toward me fully. "You get to decide when you trust me again," I said. "My job is to become trustworthy, whether you forgive me or not." She studied my face for a few seconds. Then she looked back at the headstone. Before we left, she bent down and picked up the thermos. "Grandpa hated litter," she said. A small breath escaped me. Not quite a laugh, but close. It was the first ordinary thing either of us had said at his grave. And somehow, it helped. I gave Sophie access to every bank account connected to her name. We met with my father's attorney together. I also found a part-time position at a local design studio, the kind of work Mark had talked me out of years earlier. On my first morning, I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes. My hands rested on the steering wheel while employees walked past my car and entered the building. I had forgotten what it felt like to go somewhere without first asking whether my presence would inconvenience someone. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Sophie. "Grandpa would tell you to go inside before you're late." I stared at the words until my eyes filled. Then I smiled, and I went inside. The criminal case moved slowly. Mark's attorney described the forged loan as a desperate financial mistake. The prosecutors called it deliberate fraud. My father's copies, the lender's records, and the deleted files recovered from Mark's laptop all told the same story. During one hearing, Mark looked across the courtroom at me. For years, one look from him could change what I said next. One tightening of his jaw could make me soften my words. One cold stare could make me question what I knew. This time, I held his gaze. Mark looked away first. Dad's house transferred to Sophie and me under the terms of his will. He had updated it months before the storm, placing the property in a trust so Mark could never claim it as a marital asset. Even before we understood how much danger we were in, my father had been protecting us. We moved into the house in April. The first thing I repaired was the furnace. The technician showed me the cracked heat exchanger and explained that the unit could not have safely continued running. Dad had been right to leave that night. When the new furnace finally started, warm air moved through the vents and filled the rooms. I stood beside the metal unit in the basement. Then I placed one hand against its warm surface. The first sob came so suddenly that I bent forward. I cried for the night my father had called, for the door I had failed to open, for the coat he had given Sophie, for every warning I had mistaken for interference, and for every act of love I had understood too late. The technician stood quietly for a moment. Then he stepped outside and closed the basement door behind him. Living in my father's house felt like living inside a paused conversation. His mug remained beside the sink. A grocery list, written in his careful handwriting, stayed attached to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a school bus. His chair still faced the front window at a slight angle because he liked to watch the street without having to turn his head. Sophie slept in my old bedroom. I took the room across the hall because I could not bring myself to sleep in his. We sorted through his belongings one drawer at a time. Some days, we managed an entire closet. Other days, one pair of socks was enough. In September, the police returned several personal items recovered from Dad's car. His cane, a flashlight, the overnight bag, and the empty brown envelope, sealed inside a clear evidence sleeve. I placed the bag in the hallway closet and left it there. For 6 weeks, I walked past it every day. I saw it whenever I reached for my coat, whenever I put away the vacuum, whenever I opened the door and pretended I had forgotten it was there. Then, on Sophie's 16th birthday, I finally took it down. We sat together on the hallway floor. My hands trembled as I opened the zipper. Inside was one neatly folded shirt, a toothbrush, a paperback mystery novel with a bent corner, and the second bottle of his heart medication. I stared at it. The medicine had been inside the bag the entire time. Beneath those things lay a photograph of me at 7 years old, sitting on the steps of his school bus with one front tooth missing. I was laughing at the camera. Dad's shadow stretched across the pavement in front of me. My breath caught. Then Sophie reached into the bag. There's something else. At the bottom was a small wrapped box with her name written across the top. She sat closer while I carefully peeled back the paper. Inside was a silver bracelet, with a tiny school bus charm hanging from it. Sophie pressed the bracelet against her lips. A broken breath escaped her. Then she began to cry. I wrapped one arm around her while she held the bracelet against her chest. Beneath the box was a folded note. Only one line. Only staying one night. Don't let Mark complain. Dad had written it to himself, probably while packing. A reminder to keep the visit brief. Not to inconvenience us. Not to cause trouble. Even while carrying proof that could expose Mark. He had worried about being a burden. I held the note until my fingers cramped around the paper. Sophie wiped her face. Then she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. The little bus charm trembled against her skin. He knew, she said. What? That Dad would complain. Yes. And he came anyway. I looked down at the note. He came for us. Sophie leaned her head against my shoulder. I stopped breathing for a moment. It was the first time since the storm that she had reached for me first. I rested my cheek against her hair. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. That autumn I returned to the diner Dad loved, the hardware store where he had worked evenings, and the high school track where he had once stood in the snow to watch me finish sixth. I did not go searching for closure. A door closes. A wound only changes shape. At the track, I stood beside the fence while students practiced beneath a gray sky. Their coach called out times from the edge of the field. Shoes struck the rubber in a steady rhythm. Again, again, again. I closed my eyes. And for one moment, I could see Dad arriving late. Snow resting on his shoulders. His work jacket still zipped to his throat. Smiling as though sixth place were worth risking the icy road. I had cried that day as if I had won. Not because of where I finished, but because he had come. My father taught me that love is work done without an audience. Money offered without keeping score. Dinner cooked after a long shift. A 40-minute drive made simply because someone needed you. A coat given away when help did not arrive. Mark used the word love to end arguments. My father lived it. He almost never said it aloud. He never needed to. Mark pleaded guilty the following spring. The evidence left little room for another ending. He received prison time, restitution orders, and the loss of the professional license he had spent his entire adult life building. Before sentencing, the judge allowed me to speak. I approached the front of the courtroom carrying the 6 pages I had written. My hands were trembling. I looked down at the pages, then folded them in half. I did not need 6 pages. I only needed the truth. My father was not killed by fraud, I began. My voice sounded small in the courtroom, but it did not disappear. He died during a storm, after being turned away from a house he had helped save years earlier. I paused and looked toward the judge. The law cannot sentence anyone for every choice that led him to that road. I understand that. Mark sat beside his attorney, staring down at the table. But the fraud explains why my husband feared the truth more than he feared what the cold might do to an old man. Mark did not look up. He stole money. He forged a signature. He lied to his wife and daughter. Those are the charges before this court. I drew in a slow breath. What I will carry is the knowledge that he trained our home to protect his comfort at any cost. My voice shook. I let it. And I helped him do it by staying quiet. The courtroom remained still. I am not asking the court to punish him for my guilt. I am asking the court to see the pattern clearly. I looked at Mark. He did not make one desperate choice. A pause. He made dozens. My fingers tightened around the folded pages. And then he expected everyone around him to absorb the damage. When I returned to my seat, Sophie reached for my hand. I held on tightly. Mark looked at us only once. Then he lowered his eyes again. The sentence brought no sense of victory. My father was still gone. Sophie still woke from nightmares. No number of years could return us to the moment before that door closed. But accountability mattered. After court, a reporter approached me near the courthouse steps. "Mrs. Bennett Hale, do you forgive your former husband?" For a moment, I watched the rain darken the pavement between us. Then I answered, "I'm no longer building my life around that question." The reporter waited, expecting more. But that was all I had to say. And it was the truth. I had once used forgiveness to avoid anger, to avoid boundaries, to avoid endings. I had believed that healing required me to release Mark from the consequences of what he had done. Now I understood something different. Healing did not require giving him access to me. Sophie and I drove home through light rain. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in a slow, steady rhythm. For most of the journey, neither of us spoke. Then, at a stop sign, Sophie touched the little school bus charm on her bracelet. "Do you think Grandpa would be proud of us?" My throat tightened. I thought of Dad sitting at his kitchen table, his coffee cooling beside him, his reading glasses resting too low on his nose. I think he would ask whether we ate lunch. Sophie laughed. The sound came suddenly, wet with tears and slightly broken. But it was real. I started laughing too, quietly at first. Then tears slipped down my cheeks, and for a few seconds, neither of us knew whether we were laughing or crying. Perhaps we were doing both. We stopped at Dad's favorite diner. The bell above the entrance rang as we stepped inside. We ordered his usual: black coffee, eggs over medium, wheat toast. No jelly. When the waitress returned with our plates, she noticed the bus charm on Sophie's bracelet. "Arthur's granddaughter?" Sophie nodded. The waitress smiled sadly. "He always tipped too much." Sophie looked down at the coffee. "That sounds like him." We sat in the booth Dad had always preferred, the one near the window, where he could see the parking lot. And we talked about ordinary things. School, my new job. A boy Sophie insisted she did not like. Her face turned pink when I said his name, and she quickly reached for her toast. "Mom." "What?" "Nothing." A small laugh escaped me. For once it did not hurt. Grief sat with us in that booth. It remained in the empty space beside Sophie, in the untouched packet of jelly, in the cup of black coffee neither of us could bring ourselves to drink. But it did not take every chair. That was new. Winter returned almost a year after the storm. Winnet's Carabel, Winna the Dathan Where the Rod. Winter returned almost a year after the storm. Winna the weather report warned of heavy snow and dangerous roads. Before bed, I checked the furnace twice. Then I gave a quiet laugh at myself, and checked it once more. The house was warm. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch with a chemistry book open across her chest. The silver school bus charm rested against her wrist, catching the light whenever she breathed. Around midnight, the wind struck the front door hard enough to shake the frame. I froze in the hallway. For 1 second, I saw my father standing outside, an overnight bag in one hand, a brown envelope tucked beneath his arm, snow caught in his gray hair, waiting for me to become the daughter he had believed I still was. My breath caught. I knew no one was there, but I opened the door anyway. Cold air rushed into the house. Snow swept across the porch in thin white lines, while the porch light swung above the empty steps. Behind me, Sophie's voice came softly. "Mom?" I turned. She walked toward me, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and stopped beside me. Neither of us asked why the door was open. We simply stood there, watching snow gather along the railing. After a while, Sophie spoke. "I still hear him sometimes. So do I." She looked toward the empty porch. Not like a ghost. I know. Just things he would say. I nodded. For years I had mistaken a quiet house for a safe one. But silence was not safety. Sometimes it was only fear that had learned how to whisper. The storm did not ruin my marriage. It revealed what had already been broken, and my father's death did not suddenly make me brave. I still heard Mark's voice sometimes. Don't turn this into a scene. This isn't the time. You're not thinking clearly. The words still came. I simply stopped obeying them. I returned to work. I rebuilt old friendships. I learned every bank account, every document, and every contract bearing my name. I learned to ask questions without apologizing for them, to say no without explaining it 3 times, to enter a room without first wondering whether my presence would inconvenience someone. And Sophie watched me stop shrinking my life. That mattered more than any apology I could have given her. The cold finally pushed us back toward the warmth of the house. Before closing the door, I looked once more at the empty porch. Snow covered the place where my father had stood. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered. My voice broke on the final word. The wind carried it away. Sophie reached for my hand, her fingers wrapped around mine. I closed the door firmly, not because someone had ordered me to, not because I feared what would happen if I left it open, but because the choice was mine. I checked the lock. Then I turned away from the door and followed my daughter down the hallway, into the warm kitchen. My father had asked me for one warm night, and I have spent every cold night since, wishing I had opened the door.